Let's address the military difficulties right now. The retired Lieutenant General Robert Walsh of Academy Securities writing, restoring normal shipping could take weeks if a significant number of naval mines are deployed. Lieutenant General Walsh joins us now for more. Lieutenant General, welcome back to the programme, sir. I want to give to you just the quote that we heard from the Supreme Leader, supposedly a quote from the Supreme Leader yesterday. The lever of the Strait of Hormuz must certainly continue to be used. Studies have been conducted on opening other fronts where the enemy has little experience and would be highly vulnerable. Now, we're going into the realm of speculation, Lieutenant General, but what do you suppose the Supreme Leader is addressing there?
Well, I think what he's trying to say, and first off, thanks, Jonathan, for having me this morning. But I think what he's trying to say is, they're trying to work against our strength. They're using asymmetric warfare. It's one of the things the Chinese philosopher Sun Tzu said, don't work against an enemy's strength, work against their weaknesses. And this is one of those areas where they can work asymmetrically, and Iran feels like they want to get leverage whenever they go into whatever negotiations may be. This could go long term, and he wants to have that leverage, and he's going against our one of our key problems is trying to keep the Straits of Hormuz open.
Well, yesterday, the Treasury Secretary said that his belief is that as soon as it is militarily possible, the U.S. Navy, perhaps with an international coalition, will be escorting vessels through. Can you walk us through what this even looks like?
Yeah, sure, Anne-Marie. That's great. I think the one point you hit on was an international coalition, trying to bring partners together to open the straits up, because this is an international problem. So the more the U.S. can always leverage international problems, problems like this, the better off it's going to be. And we've got a lot of international partners that have a lot of capabilities in this. I think you can see right now that the U.S. has a great ability right now to suppress Iran's missile drone capabilities, to kind of maintain air superiority over that. And now the real question would be, would Iran start to lay mines in there? Because that's another opportunity they've got to choke off the Straits of Hormuz. That's another asymmetric capability that if you look at the way the U.S. Navy operates, they would rather, just like we've seen the first parts of the air campaign, it's like they would rather stand off than stand in. When you start putting, warships into contested areas, like contested littorals like we have in the Gulf, in the straits there, they would like to set the conditions first, and that's why I think you're seeing time before the escorts start to happen, is setting those conditions right before we start conducting out the operations.
Well, besides the UK Navy, who's signing up for this international coalition?
I think that would be something that have to be worked, but the international partners like Saudi Arabia, I think the UAE, we've had the French in there, and Australia have mine countermeasures capabilities. They would be the ones, and I think you'd have a better chance at performing that once the conditions are set where it's safe to go in to conduct escort and mine clearing operations, because these would really be more looked at by the international community as defensive operations and not offensive operations, and why you'd have a better chance of getting a coalition with those partners.
Lieutenant General, do you think that still there is the possibility of ground troops going into Iran, particularly to get the enriched uranium still there?
Lisa, that's a real hard question to say. I certainly don't see large ground forces going in there. There could be significant operations that would go into key sites like you just mentioned for nuclear capabilities. Very dangerous operations. We have the capabilities to do it. Again, those conditions would have to be set for those forces to go in. But at the end of the day, I don't see any risk the U.S. wants to take by putting large ground forces in and putting them at risk into some type of long extended campaign.
Lieutenant General, do you think you can end up in a long extended campaign even if you don't want to?
I think this, warfare changes as it goes on. And what we're starting to see from the Iranians is, even with the massive power the U.S. has, along with the Israelis, bringing all this power to bear and taking down, the missile capabilities, somewhat the drone capabilities. We're seeing those numbers drop way down. We've seen them destroy pretty much the entire navy of Iran. But at the same time, like I said, the Iranians have looked at this problem just as the U.S. has looked at it for a very long time. They understand the strengths of what the U.S. does, how the U.S. comes to war, and what they have worked against is those weaknesses. And a weakness they see here is that regime is willing to hang on for a long, long time. And that's what we see as regimes like this are not willing to give up power. They're willing to entrench themselves for a long time. And what they're seeing is, by using this asymmetric threats, by firing the drones in particular, the missiles also, at our allies and partners, and threatening the straits to keep them closed, That's an asymmetric way where they've got leverage, and they're going to use that as best they can to get in negotiations where they've got leverage to try to get the things they want coming out of that as the war comes to an end, when that comes to an end.
It is existential for them, without a doubt. Lieutenant General, appreciate your time, sir. Thank you. Lieutenant General Robert Walsh there, joining us to break down the latest.